Hello, everybody. Hey, we're doing another episode of Debate Prep. I'm going to get my screen ready to go. Hopefully, I can talk a little bit while I'm doing this. Okay, so here on Debate Prep, what we do is we take topics that are from actual debate tournaments or likely to appear in tournaments or even in classrooms and help you prepare speeches one at a time. So this is like an asynchronous form of debate that we're engaging in, and I'm kind of helping on the debate prep end of it. We're also, so what that means is on this particular topic, we're talking about the topic of mandatory voting. So if the topic was that voting should be mandatory, uh, and you were on the negative, what arguments would you make? So this is the negative for mandatory voting, basically saying that mandatory voting is bad. We should not do mandatory voting. So if you want to listen to responses to it, then this is exactly the episode to be watching. All right. We also use Chat GPT to generate a lot of our ideas. So I'm kind of what I'm trying to do is show you how to use this tool if you are preparing for debate. Now, what I kind of don't include in that is actually finding the sources and that the research end of it. I will mention that you should do it at that moment. But rather than putting it in this particular broadcast. So it's still important that you go and do research, right? All that ChatGPT does is kind of help you brainstorm ideas. And so that's what this is. This is like a brainstorming session for the negative on mandatory voting using ChatGPT, right? But it's not the research work, but research gets way easier if you do a really good brainstorming session, okay? So that's what we're doing. Let's get this going. The topic is that voting should be mandatory, and we want to respond to some arguments. So the first thing that you got to have is actually you have to have somebody who shared a speech with, or just something that you're responding to. You need to have somebody that's already made arguments that voting should be mandatory, and the reason for that is because the first thing that you want to do is we're gonna open up this. Like I said, we're going to be using Chat GPT. Ooh, hope my signal is okay. Ugh. All right, here we go. So we're opening up Chat GPT, and if you can't read this down here, it says, imagine you are the negative on the topic, voting should be mandatory. Refute this 1AC argument. Okay, so we're going to be doing refutation. This is the reason why you have to have a speech. And so I have somebody's speech, but they're going to remain anonymous. But I'm going to take their argument and I'm just going to copy and paste it in here. So this argument is that it's an advantage would lead to higher voter turnout. This is the voter turnout advantage. If somebody has made the voter turnout argument on mandatory voting, we're going to refute that. Now, I've done this before, and there is some problems that arise when you ask ChatGPT to refute something. Okay, but one of the problems that it does not have is coming up with a lot of information. So like I love that it displays really good 4-point refutation. And so you can it's the easiest way that I could demonstrate 4-point refutation, where you're like, okay, they say that increase of voter turnout is a positive outcome. I say it doesn't necessarily lead to accurate representation of the country's will. Because for 3 reasons. All right. So it says, I say, they say, because, and you do 3 of them, and then therefore the conclusion. Therefore, while increasing voter turnout may seem like a positive outcome, mandating voting is not the solution. A more effective approach would be to address the reasons why people choose not to vote. So it's kind of like hinting at counterplan ideas at that point, but let's not get into that just yet. Okay. So this is fine, but here's the thing: is that if you use this it sucks. Let me just the great part about it is that it's just brainstorming ideas. All right, so like for it assumes that those who do not vote are apathetic or uninterested in the political process. This is not necessarily true. Many people choose not to vote because they are dissatisfied with the candidates or the political system. Okay, um, voter turnout. Okay, increasing voter turnout. Like so, you're that is kind of a direct response to voter turnout because, but it's the response that to the assumption that voter turnout is inherently good. Okay, and while that is a debate to have on this topic, and one that can get pretty deep, you might like. I think that you there's room to have a lot of discussion about that because it starts getting into some pretty fundamental human principles about choice and freedom and performance and identity and a lot of those things kind of come into play. So that one's fine. Let's take a look at this second one. Second, this argument draws on a comparison to countries like Australia, Argentina, Brazil, and Belgium, where voting is mandatory and voter turnout is higher. However, it's important to note that these countries have very different political systems and cultural attitudes. Okay, so this is a solvency response. I'm sorry, this is where I'm highlighting right here. Okay. In the argument, it said that like the solvency argument is resting upon an analogy between what might happen in the United States with Australia, Argentina, and Brazil. This is a direct response to that. This is also now, the one thing that I might change is I might identify what section of the advantage. All right. Um, so this one actually responds to the harms, right? It's like it says we have low voter turnout. It's like my response to that is that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's how I rewrite this, right? So this is a harms takeout, and the second one is a solvency takeout, and you might want to actually identify them as such. What you're doing is pointing out that you are taking out certain stock issues from the affirmative, even if they don't label them as stock issues. As soon as you label them as stock issues, now they become reasons to vote, or at least reasons why the entire advantage collapses, right? Because each one of those responses has a logic behind it on why the the advantage as a whole falls. Because first, if I was gonna, just make this really simple, it's like if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? It's like you haven't proved that there's a harm. That's what that is. And just because you got a good idea doesn't mean you got a good plan. See, and so I do think that these are fairly good direct responses to it. Um, Now, this last one I might leave off. Finally, forcing people to vote goes against the fundamental principles of democracy, which includes the freedom to choose whether or not to participate in the political process. Mandating voting could lead to a false sense of political engagement where I would, okay, first off, um, my first response is I'm a little worried about the jury duty response against that. Is like, are you saying that jury duty is fundamentally anti-democratic? Because that's also um, forcing people to participate in the political process. And the reason I'm bringing up affirmative arguments is I don't know exactly what to say after that particular response. Like, because it seems like we're just applying the same sort of expectations for jury duty to voting. And because I'm aware of that response, and not only that, but that's an argument that was already made in the affirmative. I know that what they said. Like, I think I'm setting myself up for a bad rebuttal. Right now, if this were the first affirmative, I might put that in there. But this one, maybe I might turn into a critique, and you're going to have to look up what a critique is. We're going to talk a little bit about it. All right, so this is some pretty good refutation, but those are the sort of modifications I'd make to it. Keep in mind that anytime I'm going over stuff on with Chat GPT, it's rare that I just go, "Yep, that's perfect." Like I've never seen that before. And not only that, but oh, I for instance on these responses, there's other countries that um have mandatory voting and don't have high voter turnout. That is something that you need to discover through research, right? As soon as you start getting down to um, like really specific fact level information, that's where you want to open up um, a database, or you want to find recent reputable news sources that have reported certain facts. And so I think that that would be a good database search, is like which countries have mandatory voting but don't have high voter turnout. I remember uh, looking that up. Okay. So that, like, you could add that, or just like replace this one argument with that one, because that kind of comes over the top, right? You're pointing out this argument right here points out the fallacy, the false analogy that the the affirmative is using. But now you can take it a step further and say, not only did they commit a logical fallacy, but they omitted data from these findings. And so that's like a step up, right? And so talk about all the other countries that they didn't list. And you could find that pretty easy. Uh, which countries have mandatory voting but low voter? All right, here we go. Peru. Now the thing is, you want to double check this level uh, of stuff. Now this type of trivia, I think, is perfectly fine for um, a, a simple internet search. Wikipedia, Aspen Public Radio, interesting. Wikipedia seems like this is the type of answer for, the type of question for Wikipedia answer. Internet compulsory voting. Okay. So it's like, hey, the US can learn a thing or two from Peru, and then Peru elections have problems. It's like, man, it's really all over the place. But still, like, the most direct response, like, I'm okay with it. Depends on what type of question you're trying to answer. Um, does it say what the voter turnout is? Voting mandatory turnout. That's the US. Whatever. All right. So that's why I don't do a lot of the research on these shows, is because it's like it's going to require a little bit more of validating that, right? That is exactly the type of information that you have to set a source for. And then when you don't set a source, people are like, "So how do you know this?" It's like, "Well, I asked Chat GPT." It's like, well, you like Chat GPT is not at the point in which it can make that level of factual claims without a double check on it. All right, but the sort of the brainstorming and reasoning capabilities are what we're using it for, right? Um, so Peru, Bolivia, yeah. There's a couple of arguments, and so like I would probably replace this one. I might convert this into more of a critique argument, and then replace it in my list of refutations with the counter examples. That's good for, but that's only good for a section of it. Okay, so it's only good for one section of it. Now, here's a thing that happens a lot. Imagine that the affirmative included in their plan that election day would be a national holiday. Explain why that is extra topical. Okay, so sometimes, and I like doing this, and so this is why I'm pointing this out, is because I do encourage people to make Election Day a national holiday on the mandatory voting, right? And so because what you're doing is now you're mandating that employers recognize it as well. I think that's like part of the mandate, but I think that is completely legitimate for people to raise concern over, uh, you trying to win off of that because that sounds nice. You know, what I mean? It's like rather than the mandate part. And so I think that you should really force them onto the mandate ground, right? And this topicality argument does that, or it helps you do that, right? Okay. So what that means is that the the topic is mandatory voting. Like voting should be mandatory. It's and saying that voting should be held on a national holiday is not the same thing. And you could test that by asking, um, can you have a election day as a national holiday without mandating voting? The answer is yes, you can. So if you can do that, then that doesn't mean it is absolutely integral to the plan itself, right? And so you're trying to, it's like this whole sort of a spoonful of sugar, philosophy just kind of helps the bitterness of the mandate go down. It's like, yeah, like that's what makes your plan appealing, not the mandate part, right? And I think that you need to defend the mandate. Anyways, I'm sorry, that's more on the philosophical level. But if the affirmative plan included making election day a national holiday, it could be considered extra topical because it goes beyond the scope of mandatory voting, which is the main topic of the debate. The topic of mandatory voting refers specifically to the requirement that eligible citizens must participate in the voting process, usually through the act of casting a ballot. While making election day a national holiday may encourage voter turnout and make it easier for people to vote, it does not directly address the question of whether or not voting should be mandatory. Okay, this is not organized particularly well. Reorganize using um, counter definition. Violation standards more than one. And I think they'll call them, I'm going to call them impacts. Impacts more than one. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to get it to like be a little bit more um, comprehensive in the argument that it's putting together. So you can have a little bit more reassurance in your rebuttal that you got everything covered. Okay, so these are the stock issues for what you call it, topicality. All right, counter definition. The affirmative plan is not within the scope of the resolution, which only addresses the question of whether or not. That's not exactly what it is. Needs exceeds the scope of the okay. It's not doing it particularly good, but this one's good. Limits and clash. Okay, allows the affirmative to include allowing the affirmative to include policies outside the scope of the resolution undermines the limits of the debates, making it difficult for the negative to prepare a coherent and effective argument. All right. Clash. The affirmative's plan is to make election day a national holiday, does not engage with the central question. This reduces the opportunity for a productive clash between the two sides. Okay, there you go. Impacts education and fairness, allow, so that those are good. What you need to do is you need to have a tighter counter definition. All right, so you'd have to counter define what mandatory voting, or just um, voting should be. Yeah, voting. So that the act of casting a ballot for a political representative. You could find a better definition than that. I'm just coming up with, you could ask Chat GPT for a better definition, but it needs to be a definition about the words within the resolution. And then the violation is kind of like the national holiday is not required to is not voting in and of itself, right? Like having a national people can choose not to vote on a national holiday. There is no necessary casting a ballot on the national holiday. Okay, and so the counter definition and violation of the weak parts, but the standards, gets a little bit better. And you can ask for more. You can just ask for more standards. I don't like those standards. Give me some more. And I know that it will come up with more, but those ones are particularly fine. Are totally fine. Okay. So, but the thing is, what that does, one of the impacts that it doesn't explain, and this kind of gets onto higher level um, strategy, is that now you, on the negative, can counterplan with the national holiday. But now you say it's like we still get higher voter turnout. Um, Craft a counter plan um, for a national election holiday, but without a mandate for um, voting. Okay. Organize using and text, solvency, and competition. These are the stock issues for counterplans now. All right. These are the things that you enter into Chat GPT to help organize the way it pops stuff out. Plan text, United States federal government. We should declare election day a national holiday. Um, there we go. Without mandating citizens. So like Chat GPT put this in there, but that's kind of a ridiculous, like that's false competition. All right. So I would say just United States federal government should declare election day a national holiday. Period. Full stop. Nothing else. Right. And so you can clarify. It's like just to be clear, this is the same plan as theirs, but it removes the mandate for voting. The only thing that was actually topical. Right. Increase access to polling station, political engagement, addressing voter suppression. Um, yeah, I love that suppression argument. That's a good little spike right there. These are all reasons why voter turnout should go up because of the national holiday. Guess what? The advantage that we started with was increase voter turnout. So you can still solve for the um, you can still solve for voter turnout. You're like, so you don't necessarily need to make the argument that voter turnout is not a bad or good thing inherently. If you want to skip that argument, you just kind of go, listen, or you can just go, listen, if you do think that voter turnout is a good thing, we can get voter turnout. We could just do a national holiday and without the mandate. Okay. And so like, and now what that does is it takes offense away from the affirmative, or more like you match their offense. That's what I should say. Okay, because both of you have points on the voter turnout argument. You could just make it a national holiday without doing the mandate. Now, competition, making it easier for citizens to participate. However, does not require participate in the voting process, which is central, but for providing our alternative solutions address some of the same issues. The counterplan offers a negative, more competitive position in the debate. It allows the negative to engage with the affirmative on the question of whether or not. Yeah, okay. There's talk about like now we can compete with the affirmative. You have to come up with a disadvantage, all right? And so, or you could do a critique. And, sorry. Generate a critique against mandatory voting, and I spelled it KRTIK. What I'm hoping is that'll trigger the Chat GPT to like focus on sort of debate-oriented critiques, ones that have already been kind of structured out and applied to similar situations, and bring it out here. Okay, um, imposition form of oppression that undermines the principles of democracy. Okay, so that was like remember the one of the refutations. It was that. I'm like, yeah, repurpose that as a critique. It did it all on its own. Um, Coercion, symbolic violence, systemic issues. Yeah. Um, I again using um, framework. I'm going to include a common phrase. I'm just going to force it to. Using framework, um, link, implication. Right. So the stock issues for critiques, and those ones are a little bit more disputed, and I love that. But here we go. This is a fairly decent explanation on a very beginner level for like the framework argument, just like conceptually fiat. And so there is really no mandate that's going to happen at the end of this round. What we need to do is we need to talk about what we are, like the reality of the things that we are advocating, not the pretend symbolism of passing laws in Congress, which we will probably never do. It's important to ground our argument to the reality of the world we inhabit and the issues that we face. Okay. So, the imposition of mandatory voting assumes that individuals have a duty to participate in the political process regardless of personal beliefs. This assumption is problematic. Oh man, you know what a great implication would be is like he's like you shouldn't vote in this round by imposing a mandatory requirement. But that's hilarious. Oh, I never thought about that. Oh man, that's great. I love that, and I hate it. The imposing a mandatory requirement to vote, we risk ignoring the underlying systemic issues that contribute to political disengagement and disenfranchisement. The one thing I don't like about Chat GPT is that the critiques that it puts together is always incorporates this ignoring language. It's like because we're looking at this, we're ignoring these other things, and it's like I understand there's probably a lot of critiques that are formed that way, but I don't know. I just think there's stronger ways of doing it because it just sounds like a masking disadvantage, and not the biggest fan. Okay, implication: the imposition of mandatory voting reinforces social hierarchies and perpetuate marginalizations of those who feel excluded from the political process. Alternative: rather than imposing mandatory voting, we should focus on addressing underlying systemic issues that contribute to political disengagement. It's okay. This is kind of like. Yeah, this is kind of like my first critique, but I think it kind of gives the shape of it a little bit, and it helps on the starting end. I One thing that I would be including in a sort of more critical argument on this topic would be how the it's now the presumption of guilt. If you don't vote, it's on you to prove that it wasn't because of misinformation or disenfranchisement or these systemic issues. Like you are punishing people for twice, basically. Like first off, like being disenfranchised, and then secondly, you're punishing them because they're disenfranchised. It's like this like cycle. And guess who's going to be targeted the most? All right. Um, Elderly people of color, the ones that are have the hardest time getting ways to transport themselves to polling stations or to register or to see to read the ballots, the ones that have the hardest time getting identification, and so the ones that are most likely to work even when you do declare a national holiday, and so the like I don't know. I'd make it sharper. I'd make it cut a little cleaner than that. But that again, that's the thing that ChatGPT can't do, right? It's like I think this is great for like a beginner level debate. This like kind of gets your foot in the door and get you started, but there's a long way to go. ChatGPT is probably going to catch up pretty soon, but it'll get there. So the reason we generated this one though is that um, the argument is that uh, we want to compete with the plan. We want to say that the national holiday is good, the mandate is bad. Why is it bad? It's like, well, because I have this critique about mandated voting. And so this is one thing that you should have had prepared in the first place. And now you just run that little extra topicality argument and the counter plan in order to point towards this sort of critique of mandatory voting. And I think there's like, yeah, I think that's probably where the best part of the mandatory voting debate happens is on the critical level about freedom and representation and how we know and stuff like that. Okay. All right. Um, let's do one solid one. So let's do generate a disadvantage. Now, you might be thinking it's like, oh my God, there's so much stuff. What am I supposed to say? It's like, yeah, I understand. I understand. I'm generating a big old list of things that you can say, and you only get 6 minutes in an IPDA debate to say these things. So you are going to have to make choices about what arguments to include and which ones not to include. That is a beautiful problem to have. Okay, but at the same time, it is a problem, and this particular live stream doesn't solve it for you. All right, I pump out that information, and now it's up to you to take that information and decide, am I going to run all of the refutation, or am I only going to do a few of them, and then am I going to move on to, do they have a national holiday part of their plan? If they do, then maybe I'm doing this extra T thing. If not, then I'm not. Okay. And that also takes out the counter plan for that one. Am I running the critique? If I'm doing a critique and refutation, is that enough? If not, I got one more. All right. So generate um, a disadvantage using uniqueness, link, internal link, and impact. I'm just saying a new disadvantage. I don't want it to just sort of package that critique. I hate when people do that. Okay, but turnout is low. The imposition of mandatory voting may actually decrease political engagement and reduce the quality of democratic process by forcing individuals to participate in political process. We risk reducing the quality of their engagement and creating a false sense of political involvement. Yeah, it is kind of, when individuals are forced to participate in a political process, they may not have the same level of interest or engagement. Okay. The impact of reduced political engagement is that it can lead to a decrease in the quality of democratic process, with uninformed or disinterested individuals casting votes that may not reflect their true views. This can undermine the legitimacy of the political process. It kind of repeats the same thing over and over again, and that's why I think the disadvantage level is kind of a lame area of debate for this one, where it seems like people really want to gravitate towards the question of the bigger questions about freedom, and what does it mean to represent your political beliefs, right? Like, can you do that and still have a mandate? I think those are some pretty important questions that should be hashed out during this debate. And saying like, oh, it will increase voter turnout, it won't increase voter turnout, doesn't quite get you there. And so just get, I think the negative, it's your responsibility to bring the debate there, to kind of take it and say, all right, this is about freedom. What does it mean? What does it look like? Um, and yeah, just so you're going to have to do a bit of work on refutation, and I think you might have to do a little bit of um, critique work. Actually, you have to kind of figure out what that means. All right. Hey, if you got any questions, even after the broadcast is finished, go ahead and put them in the comments. I will do my best to get back to you on them. All right. Or respond to this, repost it, retweet it. Like, if you like it, then cool. But we are coming back in a little bit. We're going to be talking about another topic in a little bit. All right. Check us out. Thank you. See ya.